The standoff comes less than 48 hours after the massacre at the offices of the satirical weekly newspaper Charlie Hebdo, targeted for its caricatures of the Muslim prophet Muhammad.
They kill in the name of Allah, yet there has to be some measure of restraint and refusal to knee-jerk. Because what would seem to be happening in France and around the world is much more than just a simple theological battle. It is becoming the connected network of killers who will slaughter and terrorize for reasons much deeper than religion. Let's welcome to MidPoint the former Assistant Secretary for Policy at the Department of Homeland Security, now part of the international law firm Steptoe and Johnson. Stewart Baker joins us today. Stewart, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Your initial reaction, first of all, in the news that we're getting now from France that apparently the two main hostages, the Karachi brothers, are dead. So is the individual at the market in Paris. It would seem that French authorities launched right into this, very dedicated, got to work, and found these people very quickly.
Yes, they did, and they took very dramatic action. It's if the story that there are additional people who've been killed in the course of the siege is true, the French will have paid a pretty heavy price, but I don't think the French government had any choice but to act quickly and decisively and with a lot of force.
I said here at the beginning just a few moments ago the words I think that no one really wants to say out loud. We are at war, and I mean when I say that it is not just the United States, but it is the globe itself that is under assault from these terrorists, whatever they may believe in. Am I overstating?
I don't think you are. There's certainly Islamic terrorists have believed they're at war with us and with the West for 20 years. It's just a question of whether they can get us to notice.
Let's then talk about getting us to notice. Certainly, we have all noticed what's happened in France. This was a brutal attack on innocents. What does this now then tell us about the need here at home for American Homeland Security, for us to make sure that we are doing everything possible? And then again, I'll even ask you, are we doing everything that's necessary and possible?
So I think it's clear that after a long period of trying to attack international aviation, the Islamic terrorists, Alqaeda in Yemen, for example, have found something that actually works for them, which is these individual attacks, small group attacks that may or may not be well organized and that are just designed to kill 10 or 20 people in a city center. The model for this was the attack on Mumbai, which killed over 100. And we're going to see efforts to do that. We already have seen that kind of attack in the United States. It doesn't require much infrastructure, and it may not even require that you know the people who are carrying out the attacks if you're the inspirer of it. So, yes, we should be preparing for this, and we should be trying to find small groups who are self-radicalized or who have tenuous ties to the organizations that are inspiring this. I'm not sure we are doing everything we can. I think the FBI is very good at finding people who are in the early planning stages and compromising them in ways that make it possible to prosecute them. But I would ask some questions about whether the Snowden revelations and the enthusiasm for rediscovering our civil liberties might not have been premature. What we should have done with respect to all of these terrorists is immediately put their names into databases, including the much maligned 215 database, to see whether anybody in the United States has called them in the last 6 months or 2 years, because that will be a clue that there's somebody here who shares their inclinations. I'm not convinced that happened, and I'm not convinced we're using that database and some of the other databases with the same efficiency and determination that we would have prior to the Snowden revelations and the backlash against intelligence that we saw after those revelations.
Here comes a very difficult realization that maybe we have to make now. With regard to civil liberties, we have a very adaptive enemy here that, simply put, doesn't play by the old rules of engagement. They are everywhere. They are homegrown. They are in small cells. There are weapons everywhere for them to get a hold of. There is a social media that works, that connects everybody globally. Here comes the tough part. are we as Americans looking at a time in our evolution where we are going to have to learn to surrender certain civil liberties in order for us to remain safe?
You know, I think we're still at the stage where much of what we are, quote unquote, surrendering is the illusion of civil liberties, or perhaps we are accepting intrusions that are relatively minimized, but which some people have hyped as a much more serious invasion than they really are. When the 215 database that I was talking about earlier was set up, it was set up with a lot of civil liberties protections. They were not protections against collection of data, but they were protections against searching the data. We have to have a smarter set of civil liberties protections and not just assume that we can demonize our intelligence agencies, suspect them of the worst, and then have them protect us as well.
Would it be fair to say in that end, though, Stewart, that the politicians, some politicians, and the devotees of political correctness are the ones right now who are strangling a lot of this ability that we need to have in order to move, get information, create those databases, keep people safe? It still is politicians and PC that are putting up the stonewall.
I think that's right. I mean, I'm a conservative Republican myself, and I think we have to recognize there are conservative Republicans who've been part of that movement, but by far the greatest attack on this has come from the left and will continue to.
Do we need to understand that Al-Qaeda, and there have been connections made here, Al-Qaeda far from diminished. Yemen is still remaining one of the bigger problems, and if we're going to get real serious about this, we have to realize that these rats don't die quickly. They continue to live and breed, and that if we're going to go after them, we need to get governments involved. We need to get Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, the others, many of these governments who harbor these terrorists, and help them, yet at the same time, we seem to backhand congratulate them, give them a little money here and there. We keep thinking that some of these people are our allies, when in essence, they are part of the problem.
For sure, there are governments that just do not treat this seriously, and we will now have more allies in Europe. Frankly, there are governments in Europe that haven't treated this particularly seriously. I think of the German government making a big fuss over the possibility that the U.S. was engaged in espionage in Germany, and making it much harder for the U.S. to spy on potential attackers in Germany or bound for Germany. I suspect that some of that resistance will be reduced, but we're going to have to push a lot of European governments as well as Middle Eastern governments.
But can we push them? And will they listen? And will there be any effectiveness? Because it seems as if we have tried to do that here in the past, and quite frankly, they thumb their noses at us. They give us the hand and say, we don't need you. We're doing it. So what kind of cooperation can we really hope for?
So when I was in government, there were two kinds of Europeans that I dealt with. I dealt with interior ministers, people who were the equivalent of the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security in France, in Germany. It didn't take a lot of persuading to get them to agree that they needed to work harder on anti-terrorism efforts and to cooperate more. The problem came in Brussels and with some of the civilian agencies who just didn't think that stopping terrorism was their problem. With those guys, we just have to work with our allies inside each of those European governments to try to persuade or push the European institutions who have treated this as an opportunity to beat up Americans and the American government, that they are threatened and need to respond more appropriately.
Let's talk about politics here for a moment, too, because the Obama administration is just one of those who does not like to use the word terrorism. They also don't like to use the words Islamic terrorism at times. They seem to pull back from it out of a political correctness. In your opinion, what you have seen, the world that needs leadership, the world that needs somebody to get tough down the line, or at least to start now in being tough, is the Obama administration and some of the PC that they continue to live with part of the problem and part of the reason why America may not be safer today than they could be?
I want to be cautious about that. There's no doubt that the president is really uneasy and will probably punish people who jump to the conclusion that a terrorist act is Islamic terrorism, and he doesn't like to use those words. That said, whether you think it's because he's engaged in a straightforward political calculus or because he really believes in protecting the United States against terrorism, he's done many and continued many of the things the Bush administration started, and even expanded some of the watch listings. So it's a mixed bag with this administration on terrorism, and I think it's not quite fair to say he hasn't been tough enough. I wish he would do. I wish he were stronger defending some of our intelligence programs, and I think a Republican administration probably would have been, but it's not a disaster.
When you talk about intelligence programs, I want to get back to Edward Snowden. You mentioned him a little while ago. There's still a thinking, and a great thinking by a lot of people, that don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. Certainly there have been breaches, but it's not that bad. Talk to others in the intelligence community, as I have, and they will tell you that we still not have seen the full depth and breadth of what Snowden took with him and how it could affect the United States. In your opinion, do you believe that right now the material that was taken by Snowden, that has been disseminated around the world to the Russians and whomever, is being used against us, and that we should right now not live in fear, but live in caution, and at least know that sooner or later this sort of material is going to be used against us? There will be an attack in the United States, and something like this, what happened in France, is brewing right now somewhere in the homeland.
Oh, I have no doubt that an attack of that kind is in the planning stages, that people would love to be able to do this, stopping these things is a matter of knocking down passes in the end zone. It's not a game you want to play forever. But I do think that probably 95% of what Snowden stole has not shown up in the papers because it's not particularly newsworthy. It certainly isn't scandal-worthy. Much of it is military information. And I do believe that it has almost certainly been stolen from the journalists who have it by the Chinese and by the Russians and by anybody with a sophisticated capability for cyber espionage. I'm not sure that it's gone to terrorists, maybe to Iran, maybe to Hezbollah, but the terrorists don't have the capability to extract that information. They've learned a lot just from reading the New York Times about how to avoid our anti-terror programs. And so the damage that has been done to our ability to deny a haven to the Islamic State is very real. But I think the worst damage has been to our willingness to support patriots in the intelligence community who are doing their best to stop these attacks.
I have about 45 seconds left. Americans don't want to live in fear. We want to believe that we are in control. Are we?
By and large, we can deal with this. We shouldn't live in fear. We should live with a determination to stop this and to avenge attacks if they occur.
Do we have the stomach to avenge, in your opinion?
Yes, I believe we do, but that will be, the proof of that will be in the event.
And the proof of that will be when the event happens. And unfortunately, we had to get tested once before at 9/11 to see about what our resolve would be at that point. Stewart Baker, a fascinating conversation. We have so much more to cover as the weeks and months go on. I thank you, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Very good.
Breaking back with a look at where America and other nations must go in order to root out terrorism. And some believe if that includes places of worship, private businesses, and even major governments themselves, then so be it. Because again, as some have said, and we've talked about here, this could be a global war. We'll continue right here on MidPoint.